Hi, my name is Sean Olson. This is a demonstration of how to use the Sprite tools in Wallworm to create sprite cards or sprite sheets. Now with the sprite sheet or sprite card, we can take snapshots of images and display them all out, or snapshots of objects and display them all on one texture that we can then use to scatter across a scene, and it's more optimized for game. And the reason that is because if you have an entire landscape that's full of models or flowers and grass and bushes, the poly count can explode if they were actually models. So what you want to do is make them just images. In this case, just this scene of 16 models would in essence create 2.6 million tries just in these 6, and if we want hundreds or thousands of these plants, that's just way too much. So that's why we need to create a sprite card. Placed in the scene as sprites or billboards, these 16 plants would go from 2.6 million tries down to 32 tries, because there will be 2 tries for each one, and possibly more depending on a few other settings. But that's what we can get it down to. 2.6 million for these specific models, down to 32. It's a big performance boost. And the Wallworm has some tools that makes it easy to create those. The first part is the hardest part, and it doesn't involve Wallworm. It is creating your models. In this case, I've created 4 flowers, 4 things of different grass, some bushes, and some pine trees in the background. You can use any kind of tool you want to make them in Max, any plugin, any way you want to make them, and you don't need to worry about poly count. You can make them as crazy detailed as you want. For the purposes of this, go ahead and use high detail, because all we're going to do is create a rendered snapshot. Once you have the images or the models, we then just add a camera in the scene. And what we want to do is make it so that camera is animated to, for each frame, it's going to show one image. So if I go to frame 1, you're going to see the camera is now looking at that object. Camera, or frame 2, we're going to go and see that object, etc., on down the line. Once you have that, and I guess I should point out that when you do this, you should make sure that your tangents are at step mode. You can see this down here, because we want each step to go 100 with no easing at all between this point and this point. So we want it to go from there to there in steps. And if you don't understand that, you probably should learn a little bit about the tangent keys and animation, which you can find in the docs. So again, we have it stepping from one to these at each frame. And if we change our view to the camera, and let's turn on save frames here, this is what the camera is going to render. And I cycle through the frames, you'll see that each frame on this is a picture, each object. And that's what the camera is going to render for those different frames. So let's go back to the beginning here. The next thing we have to do is render this out. And you'll want to go to your render settings, and you'll want the width and height to be a square dimension, and make sure it also has a range that's limited to the first and last frame of your animation for your camera. In this case, you see I start at frame 0, you go to frame 15. Up here in my animation, I have range from 0 to 15. If I had, this is for 16 frames, because the 0 is the first one. If I had, instead of 16 objects, I had 32, then I would go from 0 to 31. I then need to save my file, and I need to choose a bitmap type. We should probably choose TGA for this, and I've already got this saved out to an output path here. And this is important. You need to add this option, this checkbox that says put image file lists in output path, and you should use the legacy 3ds Max image file list, the .ifl, because that's the format that Wallworm uses for these functions. And when we click render, it's going to go through and render all those files. I've already rendered them previously, but we'll let this go again. It's going to go through and render each one, and it will save them out to a file. And once that's done, then we'll bring out the sprite tool. And what we want to do now is open up the material editor. And now we need to create a bitmap. Open bitmap, go to where we saved those. I saved these into a folder called test1. And we need to look for the IFL that I made. Open it. And this IFL is used in Max just like any other bitmap, but it's animated. So if I go through the timeline here, go to frame 2, you'll see that the image changes on this bitmap, and we're going to go through and it will cycle through all the images that we made of these plants. And now that we have these, we can create our sprite card. So I'm going to call this detail demonstration, and I'm going to make it easier in the future to find it, I'm going to plop it into a sample slot here. It's called detail demonstration. Now we need to open up the wallworm tools. We want to go to the extras and go to sprite tools. Now we would need to choose map. We're going to choose the detail demonstration file that we just created. The map, I mean. We want it to be an instance. And now we need to set the number of rows and columns in this. In this case, this is going to be a 4x4. I had 16 models that turned into 16 bitmaps. So I need to use the same number of items. And I'm going to choose 4x4. And I want the dimensions to match the dimensions we used in our render output here. The width is 256. And then I just need to press this button that says Make Sprite Sheet. If we press this, we need to have it saved somewhere. We're going to call it Demonstration Sprite Sheet.tga. And it's going to go through and render this out. It doesn't actually use the viewport rendering here. It's just going frame by frame in the rendering. And then it creates your sprite card here that we can then use for whatever purpose we need. And this is useful for another tool that I've just recently released for Wallworm called Detailer, which allows you to create prop details and detail sprites and place them in your scene. Hopefully this has been helpful and educational, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you and have a good day.